Redditors who live where there is extreme winter weather, what is the scariest thing that has happened to you? There was supposed to be really bad snow starting around 8 p.m. I was visiting a friend's place about 40 minutes from home, and I left to drive home at about 7. It was snowing but not that hard. Within 10 minutes, I was trapped in freeway traffic in legit blizzard conditions. Your headlights hit the falling snow so they don't light up the road as much. The wind is blowing the snow around so much that you can't see where your lane is, where the edge of the road is, anything. You're just desperately staring at a tiny patch of illuminated white in front of you. I accepted that I would probably end up in the ditch or else someone near me would try to brake and set off a chain of events leading to all of us colliding. I decided to take the next exit and rent a motel room, but I couldn't get up the hill that the motel was on. I had to turn my wheels and let my car spin out as it slid back down the hill, and then I did my best to get control before the bottom. I got back on the freeway and miraculously got home. My roommate started laughing and said, "How the fuck did you just drive home?" Was driving home with my family after visiting my sister who lives a town over. I was learning how to drive, had a pretty good handle on it, and my stepdad let me drive there to get used to winter highway driving, so naturally I drove back as well. The storm wasn't supposed to start until later that evening, so we thought it would be fine. It started snowing when we left, which wasn't terrible because I was capable of driving in the snow. But it picked up fast. We had just left town and were maybe 10 minutes into the drive before it became a complete whiteout. I'm driving in the left lane. It's 8 p.m., middle of January, so it's pitch black and peak winter where I live. Not to mention these are Canadian highways. The only lights you're getting for a long stretch are going to be your headlights. I was doing my absolute best not to panic and was shocked at the level of calm I was able to muster. My stepdad was doing his best to guide me and try to find a safe place to pull over. But the winds were blowing snow everywhere, so we couldn't see the ditches or the lines. I had two worries. 1. I'm in the left lane, so if I pull over I might not know how far exactly to go and might throw us into a ditch that's completely filled with snow. 2. I can't see the lines at all, and if I keep driving I might not stay in the correct lane because of that. The only thing I could do was to keep driving until I was absolutely certain it was safe to pull over. I was using the rumble strips as my only guide since the tires were able to get a slight feel for them. Driving 30 kilometers per hour in a 90 zone. My stepdad is guiding me to the road his parents live on so we can have a better place to stop. We passed maybe 8 cars in the ditch between my sister's town and my grandparents' road. At some point the road was completely covered and the rumble strips weren't noticeable anymore either, so I was just going off instinct. I ended up hitting a sheet of ice at an awkward angle and spun out into the oncoming lane. Got control of the car, saw faint headlights, and said, "Yup, wrong lane. Shouldn't be here at all," and quickly but safely moved us back into the proper lane. My mom's in the back seat freaking the fuck out because we just spun out. My stepdad is surprisingly less chill than me but trying to keep his cool. Doing everything he can to not grab the wheel in a panic. I can barely see an inch from the front of the car. Finally managed to get to his parents' road and pull over. We got out to switch places, and when I stepped out of the vehicle the snow was up to my shins. Ended up staying the night at my grandparents' house because there was no way in hell we were making it back home alive if we tried. Found out about 15 minutes after getting in that they closed off the highways to poor conditions. We had to dig our way out of the house the next morning to go home. I got to stay home from school that day since I was stuck out of town, meanwhile everyone else had to go in lol. It was my first winter with my learners, and my first blizzard drive. If we had a smaller car we never would have made it to my grandparents to begin with. I was terrified but I was not going to let my parents know that, especially with my mom in the back seat scared. I never should have driven that night, but it helped me learn how to handle those kinds of drives later on and I became a better driver because of it. It was a fucking trip though, that's for sure. I'll never forget it. I'd say, chilling red, but in all seriousness that was tense. Using the rumble strips was clever. It was crazy, to say the least. I'm usually an anxious person. Driving makes me incredibly anxious. But I'll never show it other than a few random apologies over minuscule things. Both me and my whole family were actually shocked when I first started driving and had a calm nature about it. I guess it's saved me in a lot of situations. Panic while driving is usually a recipe for disaster if you can't correct yourself properly. It leads to overcorrection, which tends to not be good either. I learned the rumble strips trick very quick. When I was learning to drive, it was in a rural area, and then the highway, and then the city. My first time out on the highway, my stepdad would make me drive over them a couple times, both in the far right and in the median, when it was safe to do so, just so I could get a feel for them. You'll be able to feel which side of the car they're on, which is handy if you can't see them at all but want to know how close to the edge you are. Your stepdad sounds like a good dude. Although in this case I don't think he expected the conditions to get nearly this bad. Tears of joy, none of us did. Tears of joy forecast said it wasn't supposed to start snowing until after midnight. I remember checking just before I got in the car to be absolutely certain that it was okay for me to be driving. Lol, I had the same basic reaction of being surprisingly calm because I had to focus so completely. I can handle brutally cold temps, but winter driving is still the thing that makes me dread winter. Yep, same here. I hate winter driving, but I'll do it if I have to. Thankfully my boyfriend is the better driver. The only time I really drive now in the winter is when we're stuck in the snow and one of us has to push the car, and I'm definitely not the stronger one to be doing that. Haha. Ah yes, you're not really Canadian until you've driven in absolute whiteout conditions. It was snowing when we started out the 20 kilometers between towns, friend's place back home, and went downhill fast. Flat SW Ontario fields with no wind breaks and no lights at all, out in the country, so pretty soon I couldn't even see the end of the hood of the car. Slow down to around 15–20 km/h and creep along, just trying to keep the wheels straight and hope for the best. A dark shadow emerges looming in front and fortunately comes close enough to catch the headlights. It's a very large tree, 4 to 5 trunk diameter. I say fortunately because I was able to stop and course correct before going into the ditch. I had slowly been veering off the side of the road. What should have been a 20-minute drive most days took more like an hour and a half. I had a similar experience, but not as bad since I was like 5 miles from home, but the same, couldn't see shit. I just followed the GPS while trying to stay in the middle of the road, turning whenever the GPS told me, and hoped for the best, trying to walk to school alone at age 6 and hugging a telephone pole, crying for my life because the wind was knocking me off my feet. A kind person living nearby picked me up and drove me back home, and had some choice words for my parents. I live on an island in Maine. That's an hour ferry ride out from civilization. The boat comes 3 days a week typically, but there's a lot of times they cancel due to the weather. This one particular day they probably should have cancelled and I wouldn't have even gotten on, but I needed to make a flight for my friend's bachelor party. The swells were washing over the boat and a couple of times it rocked so far that I had one foot on the floor and the other on the wall for balance. One of the windows cracked from the force of a wave. I'm not normally too stressed on those boat rides as I trust the captains to be a good judge and know what they and the boat can handle, but that time in particular really made me consider that I might drown in a freezing ocean. Monhagen or Matinicus. Living out there takes the right kind of person for sure. Monhagen. You got me nice. I haven't been to the islands yet, but I'd love to check it out someday. A main story. Really, I was gonna walk away from this post if there wasn't a main story somewhere in here. Back in university, a group of friends were stumbling home from the bar midwinter in -30°C weather. One friend lay down in a snowbank and decided she was going to sleep there. Other friends walked away. Luckily they came back 5 or 10 minutes later to get her and make sure she got home okay. People have died from passing out in snowbanks in the cold like that. Similar story here. What is it with drunk people and this snowbank looks comfy? You know those mounds of snow in parking lots when they plow? We were climbing one of those. I was the only one who didn't want to take a nap. It was like midnight. I was legitimately worried I'd have to call the cops to make sure they weren't corpses thawing in spring. I blame cartoons. They show fluffy snow as a good time. They don't show that snowballs are unforgiving lumps of frozen hell. Couldn't open any of my doors, including garage door, due to snow. Looks like that may happen again this week. I's walking to school at 7 a.m. in pitch black with a -42°C wind chill is pretty scary. How do you dress? That sounds like genuine pain. Pants, ski pants, a couple pairs of socks, winter boots, a long sleeve shirt, a sweater, a scarf, winter jacket with hood, a toque, maybe a headband underneath too, and a balaclava or something to cover your face at the very least. Edit. I forgot the mitts. How the fuck do you move? It's be 40 degrees here and I'm dreading that I have to wear pants and a hoodie because I feel like I'm in a straitjacket. With some difficulty lol. LMAO. I give you props. When I have to put a jacket on over my hoodie I go into a panic. I can't wait to move to Florida because heat and humidity is my fav weather. You disgust me. Lol, but seriously I am all about the cold and layers. It's cozy for me. Dude, seriously, Florida can be scary too. Winds from a hurricane can take out your circa. I didn't think about conversions at first so I was so confused where TF you would have to live where 40°C was cold. LMAO, get a flap hat from Russia, bud. One mustn't forget the Ushanka. I'm imagining the little brother from A Christmas Story. Would a Canada Goose parka help? Fun fact, -40°C equals 40°F. My neighbor thought he was having a heart attack, but it was in a snowstorm and there was no way that an ambulance would get up the driveway through the deep snow. So I went over and started shoveling. Suddenly a pickup truck with a plow on it came flying out of the blinding snow and nearly ran over me. It was terrifying. Turns out my neighbor called someone who had a truck who came to help. I've had a lot of close calls in winter, but being hit at high speeds by a big hunk of metal is scary. Sounds like there were 2 heart attacks that night. What happened to the heart attack neighbor? Mild heart attack that was caught early enough to be treatable. He mostly fully recovered but is now at higher risk. Came out of a bar and wandered to side alley to catch ride with friends and see a dude face down in a snowbank. Had to be easily -20°C out. Guy had on jeans and a t-shirt and just passed out. Went back in and told the bouncers to come get the asshole before he died. Where he was no one would have seen him the rest of the night. He'd be dead in no time. Drunk and winter aren't a good mix. City got shut down for a week in a state of emergency for a freak once in a 100-year snowstorm. Stores were closed. Power went out. You weren't allowed to go on the road unless you were an essential worker. It got real cold and there was limited food in my cupboard. I got real lucky. The power came back not long after my phone battery died. We all thought it would be the most newsworthy event of the year. 3 months later the pandemic hit and everyone forgot about Snowmageddon. Where was this? So while you were having a crazy snowstorm, I was having bushfires that were burning people's houses down and you literally couldn't open a windows without the house getting flooded with smoke. And then the pandemic came right after, slightly overlapped, and everyone forgot about it. Rolling on the floor laughing walking home from work at night in a blizzard with about 5 feet of visibility and kind of realizing I was no longer on the sidewalk but walking down the middle of the highway. The city had enacted a driving ban that night so I was pretty sure there was no danger of being hit by a car playing Dodge Semi on the highway at midnight, the highway being covered in a sheet of ice, me doing 40 in a sedan while the semis do 80. PTSD with this comment. Had a similar situation where we hit black ice on the highway, saw a semi sliding out of control in front of us as we proceeded to slide out of control. My BF at the time was turning the wheel as hard as he could to avoid hitting the truck. Was faced opposite way on the highway, then watched as cars slid out of control towards us. We ended up being one of the first few vehicles in the beginning of a 40-car pileup. The semis and the pickup trucks are the worst. Where we are you can almost guarantee that over half the cars in the ditches are pickups. The semi-drivers don't seem to have any care for the safety of the other cars. Sometimes I thought I was running over a pile of snow and it turned out to be a huge pile of ice. It acted like a ramp and threw my car up in the air. I'm pretty sure the cracked frame that car ended up having might have come from that. One time my friend and I did that with a snowmobile and a stump when we were like 10. Ice, stump, flight, broken leg. Fun times in my city. There's 2 major bridges, one is fully enclosed and the other is basically a freeway 50 feet above the air. We don't get much snow so during Snowmageddon, snow piled up on the side of the freeway bridge making a ramp. Someone accidentally drove off the edge and into the water and died. Absolute nightmare fuel. I was driving up to a ski hill after a snowstorm. Not having a great amount of money at the time, I hadn't invested in winter tires. There was a tractor trailer in front of me, a car to my left, and another car behind. Something shifted in the passenger seat, so I took my eyes off the road for a moment. The right wheels crossed into the shoulder and lost traction. The car drifted to the right, onto the shoulder. I would have gone into the guardrail, but the snow had piled up against it, forming a natural curb that my car bounced off of. Between steering the car back towards where I wanted it to go and the car bouncing off the snowbank, my car, still without proper traction, started drifting left. The truck ahead had begun to slow, but I didn't want to brake for fear of losing what traction I had. So my car makes its way sideways across the lane, and I prepare for whatever is going to happen when I sideswipe the vehicle one lane over. But just as I hit the center of the lane, my tires managed to grip the road again and I resume moving straight forward, tapping my brakes at this point to prevent myself from rear-ending the truck which was now right in my face. It feels like an eternity typing it all out like this, but the whole event couldn't have taken more than a few seconds. In the end, the only thing that my car made contact with, other than the road, was that snowbank, and that didn't even leave a mark. And when I got home from the ski hill, I bought myself snow tires, because, even though snow tires are expensive, no way in hell was I letting that happen to me again. Had a similar experience during college. Coming from California, we got very little sleep the night before due to a winter storm. So now we're driving out of Salt Lake City towards Colorado. I'm asleep in the passenger seat and wake up to what looks like a smooth road with clear sailing. At that point the other guy loses control of the car and we start to spin. Slaps the side of the car up against the guardrail, but just like Nimelaner above it was a snowbank. We then did a long arc across the freeway, turning a 180 and stopped on the other side. Only damage was every gap, wheels, door jams, on the side of the car was solid packed with snow. Fortunately nobody was anywhere near us, so we came out okay, but it was a ride I'll never forget. Edit. Adding, no snow tires. Street tires only with chains in the trunk. To the post. That feeling, when you don't want to go too fast, because snow, but you also can't stop because you will lose your momentum and get stuck. That feeling is terrifying. Even with the snow tires, snowy, slushy roads can be terrifying lessons in physics. I fell into a ditch. There was a snowstorm that left 60 centimeters plus of snow. Coming back home from work I saw footprints in the snow, so I thought it was safe to walk that way. 2 steps in I sank waist deep in the snow. I am 5 feet 9. I panicked for a couple of seconds, then I rolled myself out of the ditch. My best friend was supposed to get married on a day where we had a blizzard. Of course the reception was cancelled, but they were still hoping to get married. The pastor lived near the church they were supposed to be married in and said if they could make it in he would be happy to perform the ceremony. The interstate was closed most of the day, but finally in the evening it opened. They said they were going to try. I really wanted to be there, so I hopped in my car and headed out. I was driving down the interstate, admittedly going a bit faster than I should have when I started to slide. I overcorrected and it turned into a full 360 degrees spin. I vividly remember facing the headlights of the other cars on the interstate that were heading toward me. Also, it turns out that if you spin out, your engine turns off, so I couldn't even drive once I pulled out of the spin. I managed to coast to the shoulder where I was able to restart my car and made it to the church in time to see them get married. I was the only person who wasn't immediate family that made it and was very happy to be there and alive. Moments like that remind me why it's important to slow the fuck down in snow. Even if you have full control over your vehicle, the dude in front of you might not.